Welcome, welcome. Welcome to today's lunchtime event, The Right to Stay and the Right to Move, Organising in a Climate Changing and Securitized World. We're so thrilled that so many of you can join us this lunchtime. We hope that you've got some lunch, are sitting somewhere peaceful to tune into this conversation that I'm so excited to get into. I'm Aliya. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm one of the organisers at Migrants Organise. And I have the great honour of chairing today's conversation. I know that we are in like webinar mode, and it can be a little alienating as speakers to feel like we're in a kind of empty room talking to ourselves. So please use the chat, introduce yourselves, let us know where you're joining from. And if you have thoughts, reflections, questions, please do use the chat function and the Q&A function. As we'll get to a bit of a question and answer session later. Please note that the webinar is being recorded. There are closed captions which you can turn on along the bottom if you need them. And Becca and Nishma from Migrants and Culture are here doing tech support. So if you need anything, please do message one of us. Just a little note on today. This event is part of Migrants and Culture's Saturday School, which is a 3-year creative learning lab for organisers to embody, imagine and design for border abolition. Through online and in-person gatherings, migrant organisers are going to be supported to initiate and develop practical experiments that support their communities to move towards border abolition. And that includes all the ways that we are organising for our collective safety, our well-being and transformation. And so today's event is the first of 3 public spring conversations that frame the context in which we're going to be exploring these practical experiments for border abolition. There are 2 more events that are going to be happening next week, and I really hope that you'll be able to join us for those conversations too. And I hope that we'll be sharing some links in the chat for ways that you can register and join. And just to say, Saturday School is delivered by Migrants and Culture in partnership with Migrants Organise, the Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust, Healing Justice London and Align. And so why are we meeting today? We know that in our lifetime, we are facing the reality that conflict and climate change will continue, as will the necessity of migration. And yet faced with this ongoing reality, this government and governments around the world are spending billions on the industry of militarisation, surveillance, and bordering in the name of so-called national security, rather than investing in the prevention of conflict and war, instead of building community health and well-being, and adaptation in the face of climate change. Migration may be framed as a threat by a hostile media and political landscape, but migration is also a space where our struggles and our solidarities meet and collide. And so today we're going to be exploring some key questions. How are we organising around the 2 key principles that have emerged as demands from communities on the front lines of climate breakdown? That is the right to stay, which is the right to defend communities from the impacts of climate change and from securitisation. And secondly, around the right to move, that is to be able to move safely and with dignity when staying is not possible or desirable. And so today, in conversation with 3 phenomenal organisers, thinkers, strategists, we are going to be exploring how we are transforming the narrative of securitisation towards climate change, mitigation, adaptation and reparations, how we are retrofitting our buildings and built environment to weather a changing world, and also think about how community organising efforts are attempting to reunite Palestinian families and offer sanctuary until it is safe to return. With Innah Gaspar, Scott McAulay, and Ghassan Ghaben, we are looking at these 3 different angles to offer some provocations on what it means to organise around the right to stay and the right to move under racial capitalism. We're going to hear from each of our speakers, and they'll have about 10 minutes each, and then we're going to have a bit of a Q&A for the last 20 minutes. And we really want this to be interactive and conversational, so please do keep using the chat. Feel free to share your thoughts, reflections, reactions, links to any upcoming events, actions, readings, watchings, or things that you think might be useful or relevant. And please do keep putting any questions that you have into the chat and into the Q&A. So without further ado, I am honoured to introduce our first speaker, Innah Gaspar, who I have had the great joy of organising with on work around climate and migrant justice and the intersections. Innah is currently the campaign strategist for the Migration Project at the I always mess this up, the Global Communications Council, GSCCCCCCCC, where she coordinates partners to develop and implement strategic narratives, messaging, and campaigns on climate, migration, and the border and surveillance industry. So Innah, over to you to kick us off. What is the right to stay and the right to move? And what can we do to combat dangerous narratives of securitization and militarization in response to climate change?
Thanks, Aliya. That was a couple more C's than there actually is, but I appreciate it. Nonetheless, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today and for this very important question on the right to move and the right to stay. This issue, of course, for me is not just professional, but is deeply personal. My family moved to Canada from the Philippines after a brutal dictatorship. And the Philippines today is now one of the most affected areas by climate disasters and adds less than 0.4% of global emissions. So it's deeply, deeply personal to me. And so what we mean by the right to stay and the right to move, it's really a central framework for international climate justice. The right to stay means that no one should be forcibly displaced from their homes and their lands. Humans have always moved. We have always moved and migrated, but today climate and migration cannot be seen outside the context of this and systems of colonialism and capitalism. Issues of extractivism, militarization, debt, and trade are root causes that exacerbate poverty, forced migration, and the climate crisis. And communities on the front line of climate change are clear. Climate reparations in the form of debt relief, climate finance, loss and damage, and adaptation are essential to mitigate climate impacts so that they don't have to leave their homes. But of course, when staying is not possible, this brings us to the right to move, that people have the freedom to move with safety and dignity. People are already moving and have moved in means of survival, and they need legal and safe pathways within and across national borders. And this does not just mean moving because of climate change, of course, but we mean people who move due to climate, livelihood. And so it means all people. And these two rights, the right to move and the right to stay, sometimes kind of seem contradictory, but they really are this framework for an abolitionist, anti-colonial, and internationalist movement. It is this vision, and I like to quote Harsha Walala, who says, "The crux of no border politics is nestled in the border politics of home." How do we create a world where we all have a home, where we all can claim home, where we all are at home in our bodies, where the earth is cared for as a home, where non-human beings have a home? So this, of course, is our vision, this right to move, right to stay. This is the thing that kind of drives us and the pillars of our work. But of course, this isn't the reality we live with today, unfortunately. So when we speak about climate migration or climate-linked migration, what we see now is phrases like mass migration, unprecedented migration, waves of migration. These are what dominate the headlines on climate migration, both in the news and online. For example, in 2022, we did a study that looked at how people were talking about it online, and more than 1 in 10 tweets were using these kind of narratives. What they do is focus on predictions of migration that will result in climate change, even though there's no common methodology to predict that migration. So these, what we like to call dangerous narratives, are because in part due to the the global North climate movement, who have attempted to convince governments for more urgent climate action by very much throwing people on the move under the bus. We call these dangerous narratives because they frame people on the move as a possible threat, which research has shown stokes fears of xenophobia, can justify more violent responses, and actually overall completely fails to encourage climate action. So we were not doing ourselves a favor in not being good allies. And I say we because I work for a climate organization. So there's a lot of work that the climate movement needs to do in order to build allyship, to reckon with racial justice within its organizations. So we have to fight dangerous narratives, which have been, again, often used by the Global North climate movement and have unintended consequences, as they are often co-opted by others to pursue an anti-migrant, pro-profit agenda. Because who really profits from these threat narratives? It is right-wing politicians, the security establishment, and anti-migrant groups that seek to co-opt and extend threat framing to push for their own agendas. So unintended consequences in limiting civil liberties and democratic freedoms for all. So we saw this kind of securitization narrative in the war on drugs, the war on terror, and a threat frame does not bring just transitions. It shifts the climate response into the hands of the security establishment, which then relies on the border and surveillance industry, a highly lucrative industry, and which relies on the movement of people for profit. Investment banks make millions funding fossil fuel companies that wreck our planet and force people on the move. But at the same time, they make profit from border and surveillance companies, which depends on climate breakdown and racist government border policies to generate money. It is a vicious circle, and we're seeing that ongoing, and we see those kind of policies come to play. So part of our work in dismantling dangerous narratives and shifting away from this is exposing these profiteers, to shift narratives from villainizing people on the move to the actors who drive and benefit from exploitation and abuse against people and the planet. The companies, banks, CEOs, investors, and politicians profiting from the hostile environment, who purposely stir up division, distract attention from their failures, and scapegoating the most vulnerable. Weak and divided societies will not be able to withstand the catastrophe of a heating planet. We know that. We see how it will divide us and divide and conquer. We need to take ownership of our common future and disrupt power and empire so we can rebuild a society that will weather the current and incoming emergency. And to do this, we need to reimagine what safety and security looks like, what safety and security that celebrates our full humanity looks like. And it has been cultural leaders and artists who are rooted in Indigenous wisdom, decolonizing principles, and dreaming up alternative futures, who have been the ones using their voices and creativity to articulate what real safety and security means for all of us. And it's their courage, creativity, and imagining that really incites this humanity's hope. So again, just to articulate that this right to move, right to stay, these two pillars of framework for climate justice, but also for migrant justice, work together both to address root causes, address root causes and enable people to thrive, even regardless of the climate impacts, but then also, again, dismantle borders and expose those who are profiteering from it. So I feel like my time is really short. I think I might have been shorter than 10 minutes, but like way shorter than 10 minutes. I see Aliya nodding her head. But something that I just want to leave you with is this quote from Grace Lee Boggs, who says, "A revolution that is based on the people exercising their creativity in the midst of devastation is one of the greatest history contribution of mankind." And so speaking to you today as cultural workers, speaking as a communicator, it is part of our work to change the narrative. It is part of our work to expose the profiteers, because they don't want to be seen. They want to stay in the dark, and they don't want us to expose the web, that interconnected web, that vicious cycle that exists. So what I want to ask is that if you want to, as culture workers, to be part of that reimagining, it is so important for us to, again, not fall for the trap of threat narratives, and instead reimagine what safety and security looks like. And part of that work is to give a visual of what the right to move, the right to stay working together looks like. So that's a bit of my presentation. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Innah. I know if we were in person, we'd be giving you a big warm round of applause. And you can see all the emojis from the chats. That was really, really powerful. And I think particularly exposed that the necessity of exposing the profiteers and changing the narrative on migration is so important. And I absolutely loved that quote that you said around how do we create a world where we all have a home? And I think that brings us really beautifully onto our next speaker, Scott McAulay, who is going to be thinking about how we think about the built environment in a changing world. Scott's practice with the Anthropocene Architecture School fuses architectural, community, and political education with climate literacy, spatial justice, and the radical imagination. He works to challenge education systems and the wider construction sector's ongoing inertia as we live through planetary dysregulation and today's cost of survival crisis. So Scott, over to you. How are we organizing the built environment and adapting our infrastructure and buildings to weather, climate change, and displacement? And also, what is retrofitting and why does it matter?
All right, thank you very, very much for the lovely introduction. And just to check, can everyone see this okay? Just for the beginning. It's all good. Fantastic. So I'm going to open with an invitation and a provocation, because our built environment, the kind of towns, streets, cities, homes, cultural buildings, our civic infrastructure around us is one of the, I want to reimagine that as a space for building capacity, for building our own capacity to organise and to have impact by adapting that for a changing world, by retrofitting that. Because to open on some incredibly positive news, we thoroughly understand how buildings work by this point. If we want a zero carbon reality, we could be building it now with the technology we have. That's a given. The possibilities of what a just transition through our built environment could unlock are absolutely dreamlike. And it's really like an antidote to despair to know what's possible. So I want to really touch upon the possible for you and to talk about how that takes place in different types of buildings for us, but also different ways people are organising around that. So I'm bringing stories as much as I'm going to very happily monologue for under 10 minutes. I will do my absolute best to do that. And so just in terms of what that looks like, so my practice is very, very broad. So from kind of polylogues and dialogues on kind of festival programs to people's assemblies on what does climate and housing justice look like as well. That's something that these things are deeply, deeply interlinked. Everything from the rights that we have as tenants to what we don't have, to how ownership is the dominant narrative in the Western world and shapes the types of housing that are open to us, that invites us to stay or forces us to move. And I've taken people onto kind of the estates that are under threat of demolition upon invitation of organisers in Glasgow. I get the very odd ones where I was invited to sit on panels at European Sustainable Energy Week, because they take us quite seriously, apparently, because we've got architecture in the name. And kind of Retrofit Reimagines the festival I'm going to touch upon. So I hope this is hopeful. That's what I want to offer. I've not brought graphs and I've not brought numbers. So I want you to reimagine what your built environment holds. And the different sort of spaces I do that in are from kind of through archetypal company I practice architecture through. So I do kind of life cycle analysis of buildings to regenerative design and how materials impact our health and how we can have healthier spaces. Because 40% of all of the money we spend on healthcare in any country is directly attributable to what we build and what we live in. So our capacity to reimagine the world is either going to be encouraged and supported or inhibited by the way that that is continued. I've had stunts from organising with kind of Architectural and Action Network in Scotland and otherwise. I helped found the Scottish chapter, the Architecture Fringe, or an infrastructure for cultural and creative events adjacent to the built environment in Scotland, and Living Rent, or Tenants Union, I'll talk a little bit about later, because the rights that we have as housing need to be about welcoming people as much as they are looking after ourselves, because to put it into perspective, the UK and EU27's construction sector blows its 1.5-degree carbon budget in 2026. Everything we do above and beyond that line is colonisation, is pushing and taking and stealing and extracting. But we have the capacity to do better, and we have the technology to do better. So what is retrofit? Because that's something I was asked to explain, and I'll do it in like the least technical and the least kind of numbery way possible. So it's the really careful, considered adaptation and upgrade of our built environment. It's been reduced in the United Kingdom to just talk about things like insulation, when it's actually about meeting people's needs. To retrofit something is not just about adding something to it aesthetically, it's about ensuring it meets people's needs, it's fit for the future. Because the mindset we have, well, not the mindset we have, the dominant structures that are pushing construction sectors and housing do not have care at their heart and soul. To retrofit is to build infrastructures of care into that and to adjacently counteract that system and challenge it. Because the more capacity we have in our homes, the more we can do elsewhere, the more capacities we have in our neighbourhoods, that we have in our cities, the more we can do in organising. But the way that homes are currently being built and the imaginary they're based on, we're a nuclear family, 2.5 kids in a driveway, and ownership being that dominant narrative, are limiting everyone's lives. What we build imposes something on us for the lifetime of that building until it's changed. And that's something that's really, really important to remember. But it's not just about housing. Housing gets lots of focus on retrofit, but I want to imagine that in your cultural spaces as well. So retrofit can be places like Civic House in Glasgow. So this is a co-working and events and cultural venue that generates more energy than it uses. So they now have more capacity to enable more to go on. We're currently looking at seeing if we can open studio for people to do community retrofit every Saturday, to give people who do not have access to that space something that can be done, that I've been talking to Agile City about for a while. Surprised if they're watching as well. But this is what's possible. The more we do for our civic and social infrastructures, the more we can organise, the more effective we can be if we can take that pressure off people. The more meals we can share together in community spaces, the more time we have together, and the more that can be a richer experience. But it can also be like the Kinnan Park complex in Glasgow, which is one of my favourite stories, because most of the incredible retrofitted community spaces in Glasgow were one for occupation. And this was not just one for occupation, it was occupation and it was community managed as well. So through retrofitting a building to adapt it, to make it accessible, because retrofit's not just about energy, it's about people's needs. It's about making it accessible to people with physical needs, to make it kind of a calmer place to be, to enable it to be used by people with young children that bit better, to enable people to share within that space. So retrofit's unlocking our capacities as much as it's adapting to the future. But also my kind of absolute favourite story of retrofit is this one. From the retrofit of our homes, we don't have to worry so much about energy bills. So if everyone could take 2 minutes and just imagine if you hadn't had the stress about your energy bill and your heating bill for 2 years, because that's entirely possible. This is the capability we have in the industry, and what we could be doing on every single multi-story building globally now. That's what we have the capability to do. So just if you can even take 30 seconds and just imagine a home that meets every single one of your needs, the ones that you speak about and the ones that you don't, all of that's technologically possible. I guarantee it, all of that's possible. So that's what we can already enact. That's what we can do, and that's really hopeful. That gives me a lot of hope. I get excited thinking about it. It kind of keeps me buoyed up. But also, it's not just about retrofitting as is, it's about changing the spaces to be used differently. There's this fantastic quote that Sophie K. Rosa noted in Radical Intimacy, where experiments and relating are really important, because amid structural violence, we can expand possibilities and prefigure the future. So how we live at home, how we relate, the relationships we have, how we can hold space for one another, unlocks our capacities to different things. And if we're going to welcome more people, we need to change what's on offer. We don't do social housing, barely, in the United Kingdom. It's being stripped away and sold off. Councils are being impaired. And if we're going to change that, we're going to have to imagine living differently. It's not weird because the way that homes are currently designed disaggregate us. They keep us apart from one another. They make it harder to organise. They are divisive. They're atomizing and isolating. We need to reimagine home as somewhere we want to be together, that we can be together, not dependent upon the whims of a landlord. And that directly ties in to people's rights to stay and to move. But if we're going to reimagine that, there's an incredible festival that I was part of co-creating last year. And if you look on YouTube, you can find most of the recordings of the talks because it was a life-affirming experience to even be in the kind of vicinity of, let alone taking part. And Retrofit Reimagined asked the question, what if the climate transition of our homes was designed, owned and managed and governed by the people that live there? And this question was digged into in 5 different studies across the UK, from kind of collectives, cooperatives, architectural practitioners, activists. We had panels of unions, and it was incredible. And it was just going through the possible and just celebrating that, but giving people doing that work on the ground space to breathe, time to think, have meals together, to share, to learn, to share practices. And this is ongoing and it's going to be happening in other places in the future as well. But it's about changing the mindset of the industry, because if we're going to unlock this, the industry that unfortunately is attributable for about 50% of all the carbon emissions, forcing making planetary regulation worse, is changing that mindset from the individual to the collective. It's from the home by home to the street by street to neighborhood by neighborhood, because all these things unlock capacity. And imagining the retrofit of buildings, not just as staying within the boundary of that building, but going beyond the walls and into the spaces outdoors and the streets and the gardens and the places we can spend time in the first places. And then to kind of wrap back into the storytelling, before COP26, there was a large push for a just transition for tenants in Scotland for living rent, which I helped some of the supporting kind of demands on, giving them some technical advice and helping train spokespeople. And this is about looking at housing as a space of possibility and reimagining how we live and taking care of one another in our daily practices. But this is something that, in ways of cultural organisers as well, we need to be helping to forefront that as well, and to welcoming people across, because there's every single time I look at the industry's attempts at activism, the only thing I can hear is that one resonant quote that environmentalism without class politics is just gardening. And that's what we are seeing in the construction industry at the moment. I literally saw a report that tried to say we should build more mass timber because you can store more carbon in a denser area than trees and forests can. And that is the mindset that's so disconnected from nature that's trying to make our built environment more sustainable. So what we need to offer is the narratives and the illustrations and the visions of the future that reconnect us to the world beyond ourselves, because the construction industry needs your help. I will say that very openly. That's not provocative. We need a lot of help, and lots of people need lots of persuasion, and there are not enough of us doing the work of trying to educate and to teach and build that agency. I'm quite burnt out. I'm having a fallow year, fallow to the point I'm not doing too much, quite a bit, not too much. But then there's another story of the stay. So there's the Wynford estate in Glasgow, where 600 social homes are not just up for demolition. They want to blow them up. They want to use explosives, with there being unchecked amounts and unverified amounts of asbestos and otherwise in those buildings, where people want to stay. And the way consultations are carried out in the UK and otherwise are engineered to force gentrification and to enable gentrification. And there's lots of groups beginning demolition resistance, and this building was occupied for a while. So again, but this building on the left-hand side looks remarkably similar to the block of flats that was retrofitted perfectly, and that's entirely possible. So these buildings actually, you can see one from the other, and that's how close they are. But these are for demolition. People were trying to resist that, and they actually held a referendum, which they won, in independently getting the feedback from people who live there, who want to stay, who want to be given the option of changing things. Another kind of fantastic thing I'd invite you to tap into is that Fuel Poverty Action are currently doing collective learning sessions. It's something that we really need to be doing, is coming together and sharing. And one of these we did around retrofitting, and it was to show a little bit of what's possible, but also to hear from the people doing that on the ground, tiring, exhausting work of being on the front lines and both dealing with law enforcement being brought in to manage people simply for being in their homes and for visibly organising. And again, it's just tying all those sorts of things together as well. But to kind of surmise, because I really hope I've not overshot too much, I'm terribly sorry if I have. Marianne Caba once said that we live in a world that's been locked into a false sense of inevitability, but to pull our built environment into that framing, every single piece of infrastructure that you've ever seen that's physical began in the human imagination. So it doesn't matter if it's a pipeline, if it's kind of an energy system, a political system, if it's a hostile environment, prison barge, if it's an apartheid state, all of those things are malleable. None of those are fixed. Not one of them has to continue as it's currently operating. And we can change every single one of them. And I would just invite you to look at the built environment around you as a possibility and as a place for adapting it for a changing world. We can make it a better world to live in for so many more people as well and welcome them into our own homes. So I'll wrap myself there before I monologue too much further, but thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, Scott. That was wonderful, and huge emoji reaction there. I wish we were in a room where you could feel the love. That was really, really inspiring, and seeing those different examples of the ways in which we're already experimenting and how we can live differently, and imagine how we build these infrastructures of that center care and each other and being together in this incredibly different way is just, yeah, just absolutely stunning. And I think, yeah, I really love that kind of redefining what retrofitting is and how it can expand our imaginations of what it means to live on this planet in the context that we do. So thank you for those provocations and examples. And just before I turn to our next speaker, just a reminder to please continue to use the chat and the Q&A function. We're going to be coming to a Q&A in just a moment if you have any questions for our speakers, and also if you have any thoughts, reflections, reactions, links, other things that you want to share, please do use the chat as a space for that. And so finally, I'm very honoured to turn to our final speaker, Ghassan Ghaben, who is a Manchester-based paralegal and Palestinian activist from Gaza. He is a member of the UK Gaza Community Group, a collective of 350 Palestinians from Gaza who are resident in Britain, and is one of the coordinators of the Gaza Families Reunited Campaign, which calls for a Gaza family scheme that would reunite Palestinian families and offer temporary sanctuary until it is safe to return, a petition which has just recently reached over 100,000 signatures, I think, on the petition, which is incredible. Ghassan, I was hoping that you can tell us a bit more about the historic and ongoing denial of the right to stay and the right to move for Palestinians, and how we can organize to defend the right to stay, the right to move, and the right to return, and what actions can we take in this current context and in this moment.
Thank you, Aliya, and thanks to everyone who's joining us. Yeah, I appreciate this opportunity, and yeah, if we can get the slides, Aliya, that would be very helpful. Yeah, great. Yeah, thank you. Can we move to the next slide, please? Perfect. Yeah. Yeah. Before we get started with the current situation and the actions that we can take at the moment, I would like to give you a very brief historical context about the occupation of Palestine and, you know, the restrictions on the right to stay and the right to move for Palestinians. So it's all started in the UK. It's all started with the Balfour Declaration in 1917, which basically was promising a land without a people to a people without a land. So it started with the denial of existence of an entire nation. So the map on the left, it's the map of Palestine prior to the Balfour Declaration. It's an illustration of the Palestine map, include, you know, where where Palestinians used to live in harmony, including Jews, Muslims, and Christians. There's never been a religious conflict in Palestine. And the second, if you see the second and third map, it shows the Zionist settlement that were facilitated by Britain at that time, and they were facilitated in accordance with the Balfour Declaration to create a state for Jews in Palestine. The fourth map is the result of the Nakba, the catastrophe in 1948, when the Zionists committed several massacres and displaced over 750,000 Palestinians. Those Palestinians were forced to leave their homes and their lands to live in refugee camps in Gaza, in the West Bank, and in other countries all over the region, like Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, etc. The last map is the current map. It shows the non-stop expansion of settlements and annexation of Palestinian land. It's crucial to note. I wanted to share those maps to note those changes on the map. It's affecting millions of Palestinians' lives. Whenever there's a change in the map, there is displacement of Palestinians. There is dispossession of Palestinian homes and lands and forced displacement. In 1967, the UN adopted the resolution number 197, which stated that Palestinian refugees should be able to return to their homes. At the moment, there is 7 million Palestinians in the diaspora, and they are denied the right to return to their homes. And the only reason is the occupation. If we can move to the next slide, please, Aliya. The occupation have created a situation where the right of Palestinians to stay and move is different depending on where they live and what ID they hold. This is the white enclaves that you see on the right side of this map is the West Bank and how it looks at the moment. These enclaves are separated by Zionist settlements, which are expanded all the time. There are hundreds of checkpoints between these enclaves, which are designed specifically to control every Palestinian that lives in the West Bank. The occupation has also an apartheid policy of 5 color-coded IDs, which means that families are torn apart. So if someone from Gaza, I am from Gaza, I can't go to the West Bank, and someone from the West Bank can't go to Gaza. We can meet, maybe, if we are lucky enough, we can meet outside of Palestine, but we are not able to meet in our own country. And also, people in the West Bank and Gaza cannot go to Jerusalem. And it's there is a very complicated process, and often those permissions are denied for Palestinians. The only way for Palestinians in the West Bank to travel outside Palestine is by going through the Jordan, to Jordan. So through the border crossing, which is completely controlled by the occupation, and there is no airports at all in Palestine because, again, of the occupation. If we move on to the next slide, please. Not only what I mentioned about the West Bank, the Israeli occupation has also built a 440 miles wall in the West Bank, which resulted in more restrictions on Palestinians' freedom to move and resulted in annexation of more Palestinian land. Next slide, please. So this is Gaza. My grandparents were denied the right to stay in a town near to Gaza and forced to leave their homes in 1948. They were displaced and lived in a refugee camp in Gaza. They were denied the right to return to their homes. My parents, I, and my siblings were born and raised in the same camp in Gaza. As you can see in this map, Gaza is surrounded by a multi-layered fence. The occupation has full control over Gaza. Nothing can enter or leave Gaza without the occupation permission. Access to the sea is limited to a 6-mile zone, which only permitted for fishing. Gaza has been under siege for the last 17 years and has been bombed every few years. Prior to the current situation, Gaza has been often described as the largest open-air prison. The only way for Gazans to leave Gaza is through the Rafah crossing to Egypt. Over the years, Gazans have been suffering lots of restrictions to their freedom to move. I was of the lucky people to have left Gaza. I was granted a scholarship and a visa from Algeria to study in Algeria. And leaving Gaza was another mission. Even after I got this scholarship and granted a visa, it was a mission to leave Gaza because there is a very limited number of people who can leave Gaza a day. And so you need to wait until your name is put on the list for you to cross to Egypt. So finally, when my name was put on the list, I spent about 12 hours at the crossing to be able to cross to Egypt. But again, I was deported from the crossing to the airport alongside other 50 Palestinians because this is the normal procedure. When you leave Gaza, this is the only way you can leave Gaza. If you don't have permission to enter Egypt, they deport you from the crossing to the airport. And you have only 48 hours to leave the airport. Can we go to the next slide, please? The current situation in Gaza is unprecedented. The only description of Gaza right now is a concentration camp. People are not able to move and being bombed 24/7 for the over 6 months. The ICJ ruling stated that the genocide being committed against Palestinians in Gaza is plausible. Over 1 million Palestinians have been forced to leave the north of Gaza to the south, and no one is able to return. The occupation is making Gaza unlivable, and their intention is to ethnically cleanse Gaza by the mass killing and the forced displacement. Currently, the only way to leave Gaza is by paying a company that is based in Egypt a $5,000. So if I needed to fundraise, to set up a fundraiser to be able to evacuate my family, I paid over $30,000 to be able to evacuate my family. Most families in Gaza are not able to do that, and it's very complicated, as I mentioned. And even after I put their names on or registered with this company to evacuate them, I had to pay another price so they can evacuate sooner rather than later. So even if you pay all this money, you still need to wait for about a month or over a month to be able to evacuate. So, and after they evacuated to Egypt, my family evacuated to Egypt, I'm really glad that they are safe right now. But I can't deny the fact that they are stuck in a limbo here in Egypt. So if we can move to the next slide, please, so we can talk about the actions that we can take and we are taking at the moment. So education is key. I believe that our fight is a narrative fight, and the fake narrative that the occupation have been convincing the whole world is failing at the moment. The mainstream media can't go on with their lies. They are exposed already. So educating people about the Palestinian struggle and the denial of their rights, their basic human rights for decades, including the right to stay and the right to move, is very important. And educating through personal stories is very powerful. The second thing we can do is protesting and campaigning. What's happening in Gaza now have shown the world the hypocrisy and the double standards of the West government and governments and the UK establishments. So Israel have enjoyed the impunity since its creation. And now they have got the green light to commit a genocide. In the current situation, the priority should be to protect lives. I am part of the Family Gaza Reunited Campaign. We have been campaigning to pressure the government to implement a Gaza family scheme similar to the one was implemented in the context of Ukraine. We know this can happen sooner rather than later. We understand that the only way to protect all the lives in Gaza is by calling for an immediate ceasefire. But while we are waiting for this to happen, it's crucial that we are protecting as many lives as possible. And this can happen, if the government is pressured enough to do that. So the last point I want to mention is the end of the occupation. As I was talking through all my talk, is the occupation is the main and the root cause of all atrocities. It's the cause of the denial of Palestinians' human rights. So I believe will never be peace without justice and respect to the Palestinians' human rights. The UK must uphold the Israeli occupation to its claimed principles. So if the UK claimed that one of its principles is the rule of law, so it has to uphold Israel to respect international law, which none of this has been happening all over the previous decades. It has to be the law, the rule of law, or the rule of jungle, which we are seeing right now. It's the rule of power. And yeah, we have to be pressuring the government to respect international law. And the only way for the occupation to stop, it's by making the occupation too costly to maintain. We can do this by stop sending arms to Israel, by calling for implementing sanctions, by boycotting anything connected to the occupation. When the occupation is isolated, it will end, and we will reach peace. And that's what we should be doing, isolating the occupation in every way possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ghassan, for that remarkable presentation that took us and reminded us so clearly of Britain's, historic and ongoing responsibility to Palestinians and to the Palestinian cause, of the history of the struggle, and for sharing with us, you and your families, stories which so clearly demonstrate that the right to stay and the right to move cannot exist under conditions of settler colonialism, occupation, and genocidal violence. And I know that everyone here prays for the safe return of your family, and know that we are here committed, steadfast and united in our struggle for a world in which Palestine is free, because that means that a world where we all are free. And I think your calls to action are so clear and so important. So thank you for sharing that with us. I hope that we will be able to share the presentations of all of our speakers with the audience afterwards, because there have been some phenomenal quotes and examples and histories on there that it's important to remember. And I just want to, before we turn to Q&A with that you've been putting in the chat and in the Q&A box, ask all of our panelists if you could very briefly reflect on the question of where do we go from here, and how do we skill ourselves and our communities up to be able to expand the right to stay and the right to move. Maybe we'll go to Innah, Scott, and then Ghassan, and then we'll come to the Q&A from the audience. So if you've got any other questions, please do put them into the chat.
Yeah, I think we really need to be working and thinking about the intersection, and really at the intersection are the same weapons, surveillance, border companies who are in Gaza right now, who are also militarizing our borders, are also being used by the UK government, are also being used in the EU by Frontex or in ICE in the United States. There is so much we can be doing at the intersection, going after these companies and really exposing. You see what happened with the Google tech workers just yesterday. Google is also providing intelligence and data to, again, militarize our borders, and also in what's happening in Gaza as well. And so all of these things are so interconnected, and we need to have interconnected movements that work together, that understand that at the sharpest end right now is Palestine, and we will lift all boats in working for liberation for all. And so I was always reminded that a community in who are affected by Hurricane Katrina, who were moved because of climate impacts in the United States, they had to invoke the right to remain into their homes, and the only other place that had been done was in Palestine. And so you see that interconnectedness as the climate change will affect us all and exacerbate all of these things. And so we have to, again, work at the intersection, understand where our movements align, and work together to break down empire, and also to dream, to allow ourselves to vision a new way of living, a new way of thinking, a new system, and if a system is even what we want. But so much of that comes through creatives, through people who can think outside of the box that we're constrained by at the moment. And so that's really what I think our communities really need, is to both really examine ourselves at the intersection and then really go big and dream big, even if it takes everything. But that's where we're really going to find a lot of hope.
Thank you so much, Innah, for that. Scott, over to you.
Oh, that's quite hard to follow. That's very poetic. I think in terms of the own spaces that I'm in, it's that all acts of adaptation, construction, building are speculative fiction in practice. So look at the built environment around you, all of that's a possibility, and nothing, always hold on to the fact that nothing that's physically been built is fixed or has to be that way. And we need to be creating the spaces to imagine futures and to give people a taste of futures where things are actually taking care of them. Even there was something through rehearsing freedom, so a really quick radical imagination exercise that I initiated, and then Farzana took on and really made blossom. So it was even just taking 60 seconds a day, a week, and just imagining how your home meets all of your needs, and then trying to explain that to someone that you don't know. And like in the articulation, we always lose control of rooms. Whenever people take the moment to step away from that and to just imagine their needs being met. Because as creatives, as cultural workers, you can be doing the illustrating of that future, you can be doing the poems, the songs, the films, the art. Everything can be geared towards imagining that and just making it that bit more, kind of a bit more relatable, where as humans we've got so many more stories about things not working out and the climate collapse being apocalyptic, rather than we have so few where things went well. So I would invite to imagine stories, and if you are towards your arts, think of the background to that. What is the built environment of that? How are the spaces creating possibilities for different things in your art? The spatial justice is huge, but the possibilities in what we build and everything around us are absolutely dreamlike. That's what took me out of a pit of despair. It was really holding on to what we can do, everything we need to, and holding on to the fact that everything we need is technologically possible. And just that's my kind of one takeaway for that. And yeah, I'm going to have to dive away because it's 2 o'clock. But thank you so much for having me, and it was a joy to be a part of this.
Thank you so much, Scott. We really appreciate your time. Ghassan, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Aliya. I would reiterate that same point that I mentioned before. Making the occupation costly is the main thing. Maybe we can do this through so many things. You know that now there's no information about, for example, in the UK, there's no clear information about how much the UK is contributing and sending arms to Israel. You know, campaigning and finding out these informations and connecting with people, with communities, and giving them a clear picture about you know, the UK support to this genocide and how much they are supporting would be like I think a big shift in the public perspective, especially as the UK is you know, supporting a very hostile regime. So yeah, I think, yeah, just campaigning and continuing the work to making the occupation costly and pressuring the government to take more actions and respecting international law would be the main things to and the main actions to take right now. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. It's a very powerful call to arms and to action, and a reminder of all of the things that it is within our possibility to do, and how we can, when we stand together and do these actions together, we can make change. Just very briefly, we have one question that's in the chat from Francesca, who would like to say her question out loud. But I was wondering, because I know we are slightly over time, if Ghassan and Innah, you're okay to stay for about 5 more minutes. Perfect. And thank you to all those who are still here, and appreciate if you have to go. But Francesca, I wonder if you might be able to unmute and ask a question.
Hi. Yeah, thank you for such a wonderful panel. And yeah, I'll try and be quick. I need to go to a work meeting. But just I have a question around embedding disability justice into this work, and just embedding the disability justice narratives and my own kind of experience and background in that. Is I'm a disabled person, wheelchair user, require hoists, power chair user, require 24-hour care. And I'm also a coordinator for Young Friends of the Earth. And we're unusual in the climate movement in that we're a network of racialized working class and disabled people, young disabled people, which is not the norm. And part of what we've been doing at Young Friends of the Earth, and within Friends of the Earth is developing work around disability justice and migration. A lot of our young people are asylum seekers as well as young disabled people, and also Friends of the Earth is currently putting money into a court case to sue the government on their national climate adaptation plan on grounds of disability, because they don't have anything about disability, and care homes currently have no mitigations for people who are who suffer due to kind of heat waves that worsen their conditions. Sorry, I'm trying to keep to time, and I guess when just thinking about migration as well, and how that applies to disabled people. I know personally, because I have a 24-hour care package, I'm not able to even move outside of where I live in Newcastle upon Tyne, because I would lose my care package if I moved out of area. But also wider in the global majority, disabled people are denied move borders if they wish to, because disabled people, unless they're earning a certain amount, there's not many countries that allow disabled people to be to enter their borders. And then I think just kind of on that is also that right to remain, as well as the right to cross borders. So just I'd really recommend a book by Leah Lechmi Pipnizio. I can try and post some links where she talks about the impact of the genocide in Palestine, particularly on disabled people in Palestine, but also how disabled people, she uses the thing about Hurricane Katrina and the super smoke storms that have happened in California, where lots of disabled people were told to leave their areas, and she said that many people can't leave because of these like you have to have a certain amount of money, but also that that people work really hard to create independent communities where they live, and that's really important for disabled people. And she quoted Mia Bird's song, who said leaving is not an option for most people, and the people who have the resources to leave will be leaving others behind, less positioned to fight back. There's no country on the planet for Black people, and I mean all Black people, women, queer, disabled. As James Baldwin said, the place in which I'll fit in will not exist until I make it. So with that quote, I just wondered how we might think about embedding disability justice into our migration work.
Francesca, that's a really wonderful question, and I really hope that you can share the links in the chat with the resources that you mentioned. I wondered if very briefly either Innah or Ghassan, you wanted to reply very briefly, because I know that we are now a little over time. But otherwise we can go on.
I'll just quickly say, number one, I would love to hear more about the work that you're doing with Friends of the Earth. I think it has been something that I like folks that I know were working on narratives around like climate and migration have been thinking about. I spoke to the Triple Cripples about this before, on how do we bring disability justice within these different narratives. And so I would, number one, love to learn from you and love to hear what you're working on. It sounds fantastic, but you are absolutely right. Unless we keep that at the center, I think we all will not benefit. Our societies will not benefit. And so, yeah, it's definitely something that and again, I think when we're shifting narratives to justice-based narratives, there's so much work that has to be done together and so much collaboration that has to be done together. Just the other day, I had a conversation with women in migration network who are talking about a feminist perspective to the right to move, the right to stay. And so I think as much as we can to learn and to iterate these ideas together, we're going to get closer to what lands and what we know will benefit all of us. So thank you for your email. I'm going to follow up, and I'll also post my email in the chat.
Thanks, Innah. Thanks, Francesca. Ghassan, I don't know if you wanted to respond.
Yeah, I just want to say I'm glad she came in and shared all her perspective and question around this. I just wanted to share something. I have a relative who is disabled, and if we put it in a context of Palestine and what's going on during this time in Gaza, disabled people are the most affected as well. You know, it's all people are under threat to their lives, but disabled people are the most affected because they can't, you know, it's especially if they have like they can't move, and it's very difficult for them to like take very long journeys moving from a place to another. My own family moved in Gaza during the last 6 months, moved from a place to another about 5 times, and it's very hard journey to take. Disabled people end up like sacrificing their lives and asking their families to leave just to save their lives and stay by themselves, or to try and save other members of their families. So it's we should be putting like more light on this as well, you know, even in the context of Palestine or other contexts. It's yeah, because I have a personal story with one of my relatives who had to try to force her family in a way, or ask her family to leave the house and go, you know, because their lives was under threat, and she was not able to move, and it's very difficult for her to take the journey. One of the family members stayed with her, but it was very difficult for them to stay for a long time in the north of Gaza. They were starved, you know, literally starved, until they managed to someone help them to evacuate or leave the north of Gaza. But it was a very difficult time for them, and they had to spend about 2 or 3 months by themselves without any support. So yeah, focusing on disabled people is very, very important. And thank you. I haven't shared so much. I haven't answered her question maybe, but I wanted to share this as well. So thank you.
Exactly as you say, Ghassan and Innah, and thank you so much, Francesca, for bringing this, of the importance of remembering the intersections and considering different perspectives, and particularly around looking at what disability justice means within the context of the right to stay and the right to move. Thank you so much for your question and comment and book suggestion also, and to everyone who's shared links, resources, video playlists, thoughts, comments in the chat. It's so appreciated. It's been such a rich and powerful conversation about what the right to stay and the right to move looks like within our current context, and how we are organising in different communities and contexts to build a different way of living and a different way of being together. So as we draw to a close, just a huge thank you to our incredible speakers, to the wonderful people here, to Migrants and Culture for hosting us. And just as a reminder that today is the first of 3 spring conversations offering reflections and provocations on the context of organising for border abolition in Britain and beyond. On Tuesday, the 23rd, there is a conversation called Sacred Civics, Shaping Our Systems as if Peoples, Lands and Natures Were Sacred. And that's Tuesday, the 23rd. And then on Thursday, the 25th of April next week, Abolition is Presence, Mapping the Practices and Possibilities of Border Abolition in the UK. I think they're going to be beautiful, powerful, really interesting and insightful conversations. So we hope that we will see you there as well. But otherwise, I just want to say a huge thank you again to our speakers for these remarkable contributions. We look forward to hopefully meeting you all together on this journey towards abolition and towards building a world 100 times more beautiful than this one together. Thank you. Take good, gentle care, and we will hopefully see you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.